What is so funny?
It's this joke book. Listen to this one, Lily. It'll kill you.
The Munsters was viewed by many as a ridiculous family program, but nobody anticipated the nightmare that lurked beyond those giggles. Every day, actors passed out from heat exhaustion, and the medical crew remained on the set all day. The worst thing isn't even that. One actress sobbed in between takes because she was so miserable and required prescription medications simply to finish filming. Every night she fervently hoped that the play would fail so she could leave. Woo. Production halted for 3 days when her co-stars requested her release. You will be shocked by what CBS buried today. CBS had problems by 1964. ABC was beginning to gain momentum on the network that had previously controlled American television. From 1955 to the early 1960s, CBS dominated ratings and was invincible for almost 10 years. However, Thursday evenings at 7:30 p.m. were disappearing. Millions of viewers and the advertising revenue that supported the network's operations also went with them. The executives were in a desperate situation. Late into the night, they had protracted tense sessions in an attempt to locate something would simultaneously appeal to children and adults. Someone actually raised the question, what if Frankenstein had a family? During one of those meetings, they were serious. They required a family sitcom, but not the same type that audiences had watched 100 times before. It must have been new. It needed to be noticeable. However, studies showed that anything including monsters was too frightful for a family program. Therefore, it was a significant gamble to take that notion and make it work. Up to 30 million people may watch the show each week if they were successful. Their entire fall lineup may be ruined if they failed. CBS therefore looked to Joe Connolly and Bob Mosher, the writers of Leave It to Beaver, who had already established one of the most adored American families on television. After 234 episodes that essentially summed up what it meant to be a wholesome American sitcom, the show had concluded the previous year. The bosses at CBS needed them, not just wanted them. However, Connolly turned the concept on its head rather than providing the network with another tidy suburban household. What if everyone else was weird and the monsters were the normal ones? He said. Universal Studios initially detested it. The pitch was turned down 3 times because they thought it was too strange, terribly dangerous, and totally out of sync with American society. However, when they presented the concept to a group of children, something changed. The children giggled, not frightened. They found the monsters amusing. Everything changed with that one test. Additionally, the project was approved in April 1964. What came next, however, was anything but simple. Herman Munsters' actor, Fred Gwynne, soon discovered that the suit was more of a punishment than a uniform. He started his day before the sun rose. He got there at 5:30 in the morning, waited 2 hours for cosmetics, and then put on a 50-pound suit. His height increased by 4 inches thanks to the asphalt paver soles on the boots. His neck was permanently damaged by the weight of the headgear. To get through the day, he required pain medication and physical therapy. He fainted from heat exhaustion on one of the first days of filming. Almost every take after that required the medics to check his blood pressure and pulse. During the first season, he lost 10 pounds despite drinking up to 6 liters of lemonade every day due to his excessive perspiration. Because standard fans didn't always work, the crew occasionally had to utilize air hoses to cool him down in between sequences. Despite this, he referred to the position as a dog, one he took solely for the pay. Even though he earned $200,000 annually, the physical toll it had on him was much greater. His back issues were irreversible by the time the play concluded in 1966, and Gwynne wasn't the only one who was having trouble. More than 8 hours a day were spent on the cast's makeup. Al Lewis, who portrayed Grandpa, endured 3.5 hours every morning to have his face painted with wrinkles and age spots one by one. Before a waterproof formula was created specifically for her, Yvonne DiCarlo, who played Lily Munster, had to be plastered with gray body makeup that would melt off in the studio lights. Over $50,000 was spent on makeup alone for each episode, which was more than the total cost of several comparable programs. The removal of the makeup wasn't any better. The strong chemicals they had to employ resulted in allergic responses and rashes. Carlo. Even required medical attention for skin issues in season 2. Filming was delayed by hours as a result of the increasingly severe makeup delays, which cost Universal thousands of dollars, and this was occurring nearly daily. Over 5,600 hours were spent in makeup chairs by the actors together. That figure alone demonstrates the extent of the suffering concealed beneath all the campy gloss. The set was harsh too. Built on Universal's backlot, the renowned Munster mansion, 1313 Mockingbird Lane, lacked air conditioning. It felt like an oven due to the heat from all the studio lights. Temperatures frequently rose beyond 100 degrees. The false underground set used to film the basement scenes gave the actors a cramped, claustrophobic feeling. Some of the guest stars even experienced panic episodes. The fog machines came next. Although they inundated the set with chemical mist, they were employed to provide eerie effects. The fog was so thick that Fred Gwynne had to use a nebulizer to help him breathe. When Yvonne DiCarlo stumbled on the renownedly steep staircase, which was constructed at an awkward angle to improve camera angles, she damaged her ankle. Additionally, Universal had covert cameras operating somewhere on the property, photographing the actors in private while they were having breakdowns in between takes, moments they never wanted the world to see. Even while it all seems unbelievable, things just grow worse. It was against the law for the actors to discuss any of it. In order to preserve the show's positive reputation, their contracts contained gag orders. In the meantime, the temperature continued to rise. The temperature reached 110 degrees on one day in 1965. Although filming was postponed, it was not canceled. They simply persevered. The fog machines continued to operate. The lights continued to burn. The actors continued to perspire. Medical personnel were waiting behind the scenes. IV were used to replenish fluids. Additionally, for decades, workers' compensation claims resulting from illnesses and injuries were discreetly tucked away and kept secret. These weren't merely grievances. They meant business. Breathing difficulties, back pain, and dehydration. Gwynne shed 10 pounds. Others fell. The overworked lighting equipment, which used more electricity than many films, caused minor electrical shocks to a few crew members. There was no set. A pressure cooker was what it was. There were the special effects after that. The Munsters did the unthinkable for a 1960s sitcom. Grandpa's transformation into a bat, practical effects, and wire rigs were used, but they failed more than half the time. To get it right, some situations had to be reenacted 20 times. There was no subsequent editing of the sound effects. Since they were done live in real time, the entire take would be wrecked if someone mistimed a thunderclap or a creaky door. That occurred frequently. Accidents occurred because camera operators had to work in almost complete darkness to achieve the eerie illumination. In 1965, a crew member was hurt when one tripod fell. More than 100 specialty bulbs were used in the lighting configurations. The amount of electricity used per episode was extremely high. Nevertheless, they managed to complete each episode on schedule despite all of this pandemonium. But there was a price for it. Every chuckle was accompanied with fatigue. The studio staff behind each scene struggled with perspiration, injuries, breakdowns, and failure-related anxiety. Although no one was aware of it at the time, scholars would later examine what they were doing as an example of bad working conditions and occupational stress. Everything was on the verge of collapsing the night the Munsters premiered. Behind the scenes, there was pandemonium in Munster Masquerade, the premiere episode that was meant to introduce America to a weird new family. Only a few hours before it was shown, the final cut was provided. In the hopes that it would not miss the slot, people were actually running the film reel to CBS. A few executives wanted to immediately cancel it. For American families still enamored with Leave It to Beaver, they felt the show was simply too strange, too eerie, and too out of place. They were not mistaken when they pictured irate phone calls. CBS received over 500 complaints within 30 minutes of the premiere. The majority were from parents who were upset that their children were viewing monsters during dinner. As if things couldn't get much worse, the opening credits in a number of cities were shown inverted. The audience was unaware of whether it was an error or an oddity in the performance. Nevertheless, that night, 18.5 million people watched it. That represents 1/4 of all homes in the U.S. It immediately rose to prominence as one of 1964's most significant debuts, and in some way, the chaos added to the allure. The Munsters won a costume competition in the episode just by being themselves, a small, subdued joke that ridiculed the concept of normalcy. A near catastrophe was transformed into a national phenomenon by that first black and white episode. The version that aired is what stuck, even though the original unaired color pilot never made it to television. It was more than a dumb monster comedy. It appealed to the strangeness that smolders behind the idyllic suburban facade of America. This show subtly suggested that perhaps being different isn't as horrible as people thought at the height of civil rights turmoil. However, there were other eerie families in the neighborhood than the Munsters. The Addams Family had debuted on ABC just a week prior. All of a sudden, the networks were dealing with a massive fight. The Munsters faced out against their enemies every Thursday at 7:30 on CBS. It wasn't a coincidence. Later internal memos showed that CBS was fully aware of their actions. The Munsters had taken over the world by the end of the year. Their merchandise brought in more than $10 million. Consider toys, recordings, and costumes. Today, that would be about $80 million. Nevertheless, the bubble burst quickly despite all of this accomplishment. Both series were canceled just 2 years later. The younger audience was instantly captivated by Batman's use of color, action, and a novel style of camp. However, the numbers failed to convey the true polarization of Hollywood over the Munsters. It was praised by certain critics. Others detested it to the core. It was dubbed the worst television show ever by the New York Times. However, TV Guide ranked it as one of the finest. It was criticized by churches. Parental organizations attempted to boycott it. In the Bible Belt, some CBS affiliates declined to broadcast any programs at all. Because of the intensity of the situation, CBS had to threaten stations with contract violations in order to keep them airing it. Some nations wouldn't even purchase the show on a global scale. Officials in the Middle East stated it encouraged images of monsters and forbade it from operating. In 1965, however, the show managed to secure a Golden Globe nomination in spite of everything. It was a peculiar honorific. The industry continues to applaud a program that has been called disgusting, boycotted, and outlawed. All the humor, there were also subtly provocative moments such as Herman Munster's statement on treating everyone equally regardless of appearance. It was a message concealed in plain sight, not just comedic nonsense. The Munster mania, meanwhile, blew up. In 1964, sales of Halloween costumes increased by 400%. Even witches and ghosts were outsold by Herman's Frankenstein appearance. Just a funky instrumental, the theme song peaked at number 61 on the Billboard Hot 100. CBS was inundated with fan mail, which sold over 100,000 copies and came in at a rate of over 10,000 messages each week. Children aspired to emulate Eddie. The satire was adored by adults. Thousands of tourists began arriving at Universal Studios merely to get a look at the house located at 1313 Mockingbird Lane. However, not everyone found the ride enjoyable. Marilyn Munster actress Beverly Owen was subtly disintegrating. She was only 22 years old when she signed a harsh 5-year deal that forced her to leave New York and her fiancé. She prayed for the show to fail every night. She was telling the truth. She literally fell to her knees, pleading with God to let this fail so she could return home. On location. In between takes, she sobbed. She frequently damaged her makeup. While she attempted to gather herself, the filming had to pause for up to 45 minutes at a time. The rest of the cast, including Yvonne DiCarlo, witnessed it happen. It became so severe that Owen was given a covert prescription for Valium. By the time her 13 episodes were over, she had lost 15 pounds to date. She wasn't acting when you rewatched early episodes and noticed her sad eyes or distant gaze. heartbreak was captured on film. Then an almost unprecedented event occurred. Al Lewis and Fred Gwynne entered the producer's office and asked that she be released. They didn't inquire. They made a demand. They quarreled for more than 2 hours. Lewis once struck the desk with his fist. He yelled, "You're ruining that girl's life for a damn TV show." They called security. Gwynne vowed to resign. Lewis stated that the entire cast will accompany them. For 3 days, production was halted. Today, the cost of the delay was about $400,000 or $45,000. CBS resisted. They didn't want to lose Owen, who was earning $1,200 per episode, while the show was attracting 25 million people each week. However, the pressure was effective. At last, Owen was fired. A well-planned transition was what came next. They brought in Pat Priest. None of the 28 pre-made outfits needed to be adjusted because she was precisely Owen's height, body shape, and even shoe size, 7.5. The crew didn't know when they got there on the day of the transition. Filming was delayed by more than an hour due to confused rumors. CBS erased more than 500 advertising images of Owen in order to keep everything quiet. In a single weekend, they redrew everything, spending $10,000. In order to reduce her screen time by 40%, they even altered replays, substituting close-ups of Priest with early green screen techniques. They then gave the media a fictitious narrative about an unexpected family emergency in Ohio. Although it was a falsehood, it was effective. The transfer was unnoticed by most fans. However, behind the scenes, retaliation was triggered by Owen's departure. She was banned by furious producers. At least 15 casting directors were contacted, and all described her as violent, unstable, and untrustworthy. She was dropped by her agency. Auditions ceased. She lost parts in Gilligan's Island and Bewitched. Anonymous warnings even led to the cancellation of a performance in The Glass Menagerie. In 1965 and 1966, she submitted 22 voiceover job applications. She was rejected by all of them. Yvonne DiCarlo, meanwhile, used to dominate the movie industry. Then she co-starred with Charlton Heston in The Ten Commandments, portrayed queens and temptresses, and was regarded as one of Universal's biggest stars in Hollywood. But her world was falling apart by the early 1960s. While filming How the West Was Won in 1962, her husband was crushed beneath a locomotive. He almost lost his life and lost his leg. He was rescued by doctors, but the medical expenses exceeded $200,000, a sum that could have bankrupted even the wealthiest households. Yvonne gave off her jewelry, mortgaged her house, and saw her opulent existence devolve into a daily battle for survival. It didn't feel like a win when she was handed the part of Lily Munster in 1964. The sensation was one of resignation. She was cautioned against doing so by her agent. For someone accustomed to Technicolor epics, television, particularly a monster comedy, was viewed as a major letdown. However, Yvonne required the funds. She accepted the position while concealing something else. At the start of filming, she was secretly 3 months pregnant with her second kid. She was aware that producers would replace her if they learned, so she said nothing. Carrying the burden of a baby and a financial nightmare, she smiled for the cameras, wore thick layers of green makeup, sat through hours in the chair without flinching, and turned up every day. Behind the scenes, that desperation was evident. When called, she remained in her dressing room. On some days, the crew had to wait for hours, using all their patience and money. Al Lewis and Fred Gwynne, her co-stars, could not stand diva behavior. They were not veterans of Hollywood. They were tough performers from New York who viewed this role as work rather than a fantasy. They broke one day. They spoke to each other. Voices arose. Yvonne threw a makeup compact directly at Gwynne's chest out of rage. Everyone was astonished, but he wasn't hurt. The studio then had to designate someone to simply keep an eye on her door and report if she was leaving on time. She didn't back down until producers threatened to fire her. However, something changed. He first had doubts about her. Gwynne later acknowledged, but show respect after that outburst. Expanded, they established a cadence. The concert began to function when the stress subsided. It wasn't the only secret, though. DiCarlo had been lying about her age for years in order to continue landing assignments. She was 8 months older than the man who portrayed her father on the show when the Munsters started filming at the age of 41. Despite being 40, Al Lewis seemed old because to his makeup. The reverse was required of hers. To look like the younger one, she would spend up to 3 hours each morning in the chair until her true birth date was revealed on insurance paperwork in the 1970s. No one questioned it. The tabloids suddenly had a field day. They joked that Lily Munster was older than Grandpa. On set, Al also made fun of her for it, although Yvonne later laughed it off in interviews. The truth still hurt. Even though she wasn't 50, she had spent years fending off stereotypes that said she was too old. Things were tight even with a regular TV wage. The majority of her salary was lost to legal bills as the accident case against MGM continued. With 70 episodes overall, her $500 per episode income should have felt like a lifeline. However, there was hardly anything left after she raised her 2 boys, maintained the house, and paid the lawyers. To supplement her income, she worked covertly as a cosmetic salesperson at a Beverly Hills department shop on the weekends. She would hope no one recognized her by donning sunglasses. She once sold $50,000 worth of family heirloom jewelry to pay the bills when things became really bad. She was uptight and occasionally irritable, as the cast observed. However, their judgment softened as they realized what she was going through. She was more than simply an egotistical fading star. She was a mother struggling to maintain her composure. Simultaneously, CBS made a choice that almost ended the show. Competitors like Bewitched were already airing in full color, and color television was quickly becoming the new standard. Even a Technicolor pilot episode of the Munsters was bright and brilliant. CBS had a $2 million budget, but they didn't want to pay the additional $10,000 every episode. They asserted that the use of black and white was a creative decision that was reminiscent of vintage horror movies. However, confidential documents disclosed that it was merely a cost-cutting measure. The color palette was well received by viewers during early showing, but the network chose to disregard them. The show lost thousands of prospective viewers because of just one choice. And a lot of people think it had a part in the show's termination after only 2 seasons. It was more than just the hue. Budgets for makeup and costumes were also cut. After weeks without cleaning, Fred Gwynn's enormous Frankenstein suit developed a severe infection that made him ill and sent him home. Beverly Owen and Al Lewis had to purchase their own materials. Imported from Paris, DiCarlo's wigs became a contentious topic. CBS bosses weren't pleased because they cost more than the combined clothing for 3 other cast members. They raged over the $15,000 wig expense during one budget meeting. DiCarlo even threatened to resign by the summer of 1965 because of the extreme strain. Her skin was irritated by the makeup, her boots were coming apart, and the long hours spent under the bright stage lights without air conditioning drove everyone to the limit. The set itself was hazardous. In order to save $20,000, it was constructed with low-quality materials, and the shortcuts they took almost cost lives. During filming, a wall gave way and fell down one day. It broke a crewman's arm and just missed young Butch Patrick. The electrical system was a complete mess. Over the course of 2 seasons, there were 3 fires, one of which destroyed priceless props, until a beam almost crushed a cameraman. Safety precautions were disregarded. OSHA had a file full of infractions by the end of season 2. The set was dubbed a ticking time bomb. Life was difficult for reasons other than what transpired on film. Actors were supposed to drive themselves to far-off places off-screen. Transportation was not available. Every day, Yvonne traveled 50 miles in her Cadillac. Following the first season, catering was discontinued entirely. The actors were required to bring their own lunches. One day, they stopped filming for 2 hours and staged a hunger strike. The actors were even charged by CBS for using the phones in the dressing rooms, 25 cents a minute. Additionally, Fred Gwynn once received a $500 phone bill. Al Lewis eventually filed a lawsuit and was awarded back pay after his pay was consistently withheld over time. Butch Patrick's makeup rash was not covered by the studio, so he had to pay for it own. Morale declined. Crew members departed. Although they may have saved $50,000 by taking shortcuts, they lost the respect of the people who helped make the show possible. Nevertheless, CBS nearly tossed it all away despite everything. The Munsters thought about selling the syndication rights for only $500,000 after they were discontinued in 1966. That transaction almost happened. The plug was pulled at the last minute. It proved to be their best decision to date. Reruns became extremely popular. Then, syndication generated more than $100 million by 1980. Toy businesses got millions from merchandise deals that were first offered for pennies. 500,000 Herman Munster dolls were sold by one business alone. The show was finally released years late, but just in time to capitalize on the global monster frenzy trend, reaching international markets like Japan and the UK that CBS had previously overlooked. The surprise monster versus monster battle that was taking place behind the scenes only served to increase the chaos. In 1964, there were other eerie families on television besides the Munsters. The Addams Family was a rival to ABC. Both shows debuted in the same month, and the conflict started right away. CBS took a tough stance. In important markets, they arranged for the Munsters to air concurrently with the Addams Family, which immediately turned off audiences. They then went one step further. Later, internal papers showed that CBS disseminated rumors regarding the cast of the Addams. They inserted false information, such as that Carolyn Jones was unstable and that the Addams set was haunted, into entertainment magazines. The advertisers went into a panic. Even offered advertisers who agreed not to support the Addams Family special discounts on other popular shows, such as Gilligan's Island. In a few months, ABC lost $500,000 as a result of this bold action. It got really terrible. It was prohibited for cast members of the two shows to appear together in public. There was a small scandal when a picture of Fred Gwynne and John Astin from a party in Hollywood appeared. CBS further strengthened its regulations. Later, industry insiders described it as feeling like Washington-style dirty tricks and political sabotage. In the end, ABC sued CBS, alleging unfair practices. A private settlement was reached. However, the harm had already been done. There was a price for the Munsters. In 1966, at the height of the Monster War, the show was canceled due to exhaustion from the ongoing fighting behind the scenes.